Hi, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Dr. G's Think Tank on Resilience. I am really interested in community. I was a kid who grew up and I went to a different elementary school in a different town every year from first grade kindergarten to fifth grade. And that moving around, I think, has given me some really good skills, but it did not teach me about community at all. My parents were first generation American and had grown up in each of them in tenement apartment buildings in the Bronx. And so they didn't really think about community. They thought about family, right? My grandparents had all moved with siblings and there were cousins and aunts and uncles. But there was also that very real sense that you don't talk to just anybody. All of my grandparents had come from places where they were persecuted. They'd left illegally and fled for their family's safety. So building community was not something that I really learned really anything about when I grew up. We finally settled near Chicago from fifth grade to 12th grade. I was inside my neighbors' houses 0 times. We had nobody over to dinner, and my parents were not antisocial. They made some friends, but they did not feel comfortable building community. I think, to be honest, they didn't tremendously see the value. I, as an adult, have come to see that really differently. And so I am really glad to introduce to you the guests that we have with us today. First person I want to introduce you to is Renee Moe. Renee stands at the forefront of transformative community impact. She's the president and CEO of the United Way of Dane County, which is in Wisconsin. Under her visionary guidance, the organization unites a real diverse coalition of nonprofits, businesses, community leaders, families, volunteers, and donors. They tackle complex societal challenges. Renee was a military child, so she might also know about moving around a lot as a kid and how gathering community around you does or doesn't impact that. She's experienced life across 3 continents, including a farm in rural Wisconsin. Her multicultural background really infuses her leadership with a deep understanding of community dynamics. She's got a JBA, that's a degree in journalism and Mandarin Chinese, and an MBA from UW-Madison. Renee began her career at United Way in 1998. She started as an intern. She eventually became VP and is ultimately the CEO. And I was lucky enough to meet her just a few months ago. Renee, hello, welcome.
Hello, thanks, Dr. G. So glad to be here.
So Renee, when people think about their community, what parts of their lives or memberships should they think about?
Yeah, I love your story. Thank you for sharing that and that sense of moving around and perhaps disconnection without even realizing that. I did experience that as a military kid, moving all over the place. And I would say, when I hear that question, I'm reminded of that Sesame Street phrase, right? Who are the people in your neighborhood? So when I think about community,
Wait, hang on. We got to take a second for that earworm for everyone. Okay.
who are the people in your neighborhood? And so, and just thinking about, you'll find that proximity is a real big theme with me. And who are the people you are proximate with, either intentionally, unintentionally, who is in your conscious circle, who is in your unconscious circle, if you will. But I do think that the people that you intersect with daily, right? It might be in our community, we have people who come to our houses to deliver mail, or at the grocery store, or pumping gas, or the people you work with, those who perhaps you share your faith with. So to me, when you think about community, it really is those intersections of the people you come across. I think in this modern day, we now have communities that are online. We've got communities that are spread across the world, but who are still aligned in our communities. And so whoever we feel like we are, intersectional with, if you will, and maybe even who we work together with to solve problems. So that to me is what community means and the various parts of it that I think about.
I really appreciate that. And that's interesting too, when you say that we're intersectional with, what I hear in that, and I wonder if it's what you mean, is that when we think about our identities, the ways in which we describe ourselves, and we describe ourselves usually with more than one word. Like even if you look 200 years ago at people's obituaries, they use more than one descriptor term. So we have lots of ways we think about ourselves. And so it's not just where do our own identities intersect with each other or give us in that thinner part of the Venn diagram our own values and views. It's where do our many identities intersect with other people.
I think that's a great way to think about it. And, I think I was even talking more about geography, but I think those personal identities is very much a real part of that. You think about, I feel like I'm firmly middle aged. I have two school age children, right? There are a lot of people who, I wouldn't otherwise get to meet. I remember walking onto the volleyball court the other night to watch my son play, and there were friends that I hadn't seen since our undergraduate college days. And so those are still in my community, but because of different ages and stages and proximate places, and that identity as a mom and that literal geographic proximity in a high school gym, all of those things to me are the places where community manifest.
So I really am learning. I think you're really going to teach me to consider geography more. And maybe because of the way I was raised and we moved around so much, but I tend to think about my memberships as based on my identities,
Mm.
my age, my religion, my roles in life, being a doctor, all that kind of thing, more than I think about the physical places that I go. So I want to dive into that more. Before I do that, and actually, before I introduce you to the second amazing guest we have with us, I want to just mention a lot of you follow the many posts that I put out about these events. And I mentioned having three guests as we usually do. And so I just wanted to shout out Coach Cal. Calvin Murphy was not able to join us today. And I'll tell you why, but let me tell you about him for a minute. He would rather do his work out of the limelight. He was a juvenile case manager with the Vision Quest Day and Evening Program, member of Pittsburgh's Hilltops Voices Against Violence and Youth Project in Pittsburgh. He is now the chief strategist, youth violence prevention and intervention officer at the Center for Victims. And he was called in to advocate for a family today in court. And it's really just another example of Cal being like, yeah, I'd rather be doing for people than talking about it. And so as much as I miss him, I really value him living his priorities, and told him that we all really wish him and his charge well. Now let me introduce you please to Grant Irvin. Grant leads S&B's external relations and sustainability initiatives. With over 20 years of experience in integrating ESG, which stands for environmental, social, and governance practices, into organizational projects, he previously served as the Chief Resilience Officer and Assistant Director for Pittsburgh's Department of City Planning. This is how I came across Grant's work. Actually, I read something he wrote on LinkedIn years ago and thought, is that cool? And reached out to him, and he was kind enough to answer me. In the role that he had with the city of Pittsburgh, he contributed to making Pittsburgh a smart, sustainable, and resilient city. Well, that's actually what I brought him on to talk about today. So, Grant, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Dr. G. It's great to be with you and great to see you again.
It's nice to see you too. I wanted to ask you also, when people think about their community, what parts of their lives do you think they should be thinking about?
Yeah, I think that's a really terrific question. And being the second person, it gets me to made me think a whole different way about how I wanted to answer that originally. But, one of the things I think that's interesting when we think about communities is that there's multiple dimensions to what is a community. Immediately, as you're talking, I think about that physical manifestation of community in terms of the places where we live, right? Your neighborhood or the place where you're domiciled, right? And for me, I mean, that's a very important part of kind of my story is that I've lived in a few places for a long duration of time. Whether it's growing up, I lived in the same neighborhood, for 18 to 20 years, depending upon how we account it. And then, the place I live currently, my neighborhood, I've been there for just a little over 20 years as well. And what really kind of manifests that is that those relationships that you're able to build over time is an enduring network. So your next door neighbor is somebody that you're literally in it or with them, for thick and thin. And I think those types of relationships really start to define who you are as a person because they become the networks that you lean on for whether it's a cup of sugar or sharing a recipe or going to a ball game or helping to cut the grass or even in a time of duress when a spouse or a loved one is injured or sick, you become the person that you can lean in on. And that's much like family in many cases, maybe in more intimate ways than it is with family sometimes. So there's that physical manifestation of community. But I think there's others that I've explored, my professional life, there's also your extracurricular activities that form networks. Whether that's a soccer team that you might play on, or a crocheting or knitting class or book club that you're a part of. Those become part of your other types of supportive communities that you're a part of. And then finally, I think about your work community. And this is one of the things that I've been able to do as I've transitioned industries from government into infrastructure and construction, that idea of community goes beyond just what we think about in a municipal or city context, but also those types of networks that you build and relationships that you extend with business partners, with different ventures that are or creative collaborations that you're a part of. Those are your communities as well. And they have different levels of complexity or kind of depth, if you will, in terms of how you engage with folks. But that's all really important in terms of when we think about building resilience and communities at the heart of that.
Mhm. We did an episode of the think tank a few months ago about loneliness, and I
Mm.
asked chief human resource officers, should companies be thinking about the loneliness of their employees? And if they should, which was a genuine question, it wasn't, I didn't know the answer, but if they should, what can they possibly do to affect it? And so
Mm.
that makes me also think about, I mean, Grant, it sounds to me like you are thinking about work community from a very high level, really like
Mhm.
up in the clouds. How does this company intersect with this company, with vendors, with clients, with their own geographic area? But I think for a lot of people, their work community is also just who's at the desks closest to me,
Oh yeah.
um, right? Who am I? Who has their lunchtime overlap with my lunchtime? Who could cover for me if I get a call and I need to go run out because my kid got stuck at school or something, like
Mhm.
missed their school bus. So community is, it is as layered, I think, as you're talking about. And I wondered, when you think about that community from a work standpoint, this is going to sound weird, but why do you think about it? Why do you think
Oh,
that matters?
Mhm.
I think that's a terrific question. One of the reasons, and you're exactly right, I explained it at a high level, but I think it kind of permeates down into an organization. And why that's so important is because, particularly in like the modern workplace, there is so much collaboration that inherently happens in terms of sharing information or working on projects across different disciplines within a team. And what that does is it starts to build continuity. And so that type of team building or communities within a work environment, within say the confines of an office or an organization, are really absolutely essential, because you're starting to share your learned and shared experiences between one another. And the
Mhm.
stronger that becomes, I think the stronger the organization becomes. This is something here at SMB that we're really exploring deeply in terms of whether it's different affinity groups or cross team collaboration activities, or even just in the physical environment, the office space. How do you design an office space that encourages collaboration and the building a community? And that could be just around, the new cool coffee maker that comes in and serves you different varieties, or even just different seating arrangements that allows for kind of cafe seating inside of the break room environment. So there's a lot of those opportunities that I think, to your point, can help address some of those loneliness issues, but also just makes an organization a lot more rich.
Mhm.
So
Yeah.
Renee, that's like the geography at work,
Mhm.
and you were talking about geography. My
Yeah.
understanding of United Way is that United Way is a social service organization that one of the ways you help your community, like your county, is by helping other social service organizations within that
Mhm.
county. Is that right?
That is true, but I would say even bigger. I loved what Grant was saying because what he was describing, that proximity to other coworkers and getting to know each other and building coalitions, was really about building trust, right? And when you have more trust, you can get more things done. And so, yes, our work at United Way is about supporting other nonprofits, and we're really also talking though about building our communities. I mean, I really feel like one of my chief responsibilities is community building. And so how you network together those diverse stakeholders, as you mentioned in the introduction, to really help support a nonprofit ecosystem that most importantly centers families and helps them get to well-being is the work that we do. So it's an important part of, getting those different sectors, industries, people to maybe have a broader, wider worldview in terms of what's going on in our community, but most importantly, to mobilize that caring power to come together and think differently about new solutions to how to solve these really hard social issues that nonprofits are tackling every day.
Okay, so you're saying part of the purpose of this is new solutions, collaboration, like Grant mentioned. So
Absolutely.
the central question, and hey, everybody who's with us today, we're interested in your questions as well, but I get to ask my question first because my question is our central question today, and it's got two parts. I want to start with the first part, and Grant, I'm going to ask you to begin with it. The central question I wanted to dive into is, what is community resilience and how do we get more of it? Grant, since you were the resilience officer for an entire city, I'd like to ask you, what is community resilience? From your point of view, what's the goal?
That's like an easy one, right?
Sure. Yeah. No, I
Um,
mean, obviously, 3 words, we're moving on.
I think, one of the key things in terms of community resilience is the ability for a community to collectively respond to either a challenge or an opportunity. And that challenge, when I first got into the resilience space, it was oftentimes viewed as how do you react to a disaster or a challenging event, some sort of collective community trauma, right? You're seeing that right now, um, in regards to like hurricane response is a
Right.
good current good current evaluation of what is community. And so that those issues are always going to create uncertainty across the board. There is no kind of systemic way other than that that your world is upended. And the ability for a community to demonstrate resilience is their ability to collectively respond to that challenge. And what
I I love this so much because in my work on resilience, which is individual resilience, we define resilience as the ability to navigate a change towards a positive goal.
Yep.
And so for one person, and we speak specifically about change because, and this is just for anybody who's watching who hasn't heard me say this a million times, our brain has a stress reaction to
Hmm.
good change as well as bad change, as well as neutral change.
Yep.
All change is suspect. Our brain looks at every change, no matter how amazing, and says, cool, but could we die?
Yep.
You're absolutely right. It's response to a challenge or an opportunity. Any change, what's that collective response? So that made me so happy. Thank you.
I think that's the other side of it though, is the opportunity side, right? And so often that definition was really focusing on the negative, which is good. Like, I don't want to underscore like the importance to the ability to address an adverse challenge. That is paramount. But the opportunity to address an opportunity collectively
Mhm.
as a community is also something that is a measure of resilience. And I think that's one of the things that we oftentimes look at in a very kind of shallow way, in that we're not totally taking stock of those opportunities because we get stuck in the status quo. And so it's really both ends of the spectrum, the ability to address the challenge, but also the ability to get out of your comfort zone and address the opportunity as well.
I think that's true. Okay, Renee, before we get to the how do we get more of it, is there
Mhm.
anything, given your experience, that you want to add to what a
Yeah.
resilient community is?
Absolutely. So, the work that we do is really anchored around community well-being and community resilience. And so, I love what Grant's talking about in terms of community mobilization in response to a disaster and also around opportunities, right? So for us, opportunities really anchor around youth opportunity, financial stability, health, and community resilience is actually one of the labels of the work that we do. And in addition to emergency response, whether that be natural disaster, man-made disaster, it also is around civic engagement and social capital. So
Mhm.
when you're thinking about community resilience, and this is what really got my synapses lit up when Grant was talking, that ability to know that, community doesn't happen to you, but you can also influence community and make community happen, right? And I think that talking about loneliness earlier, when people feel like everything is happening to you and you don't have any agency inside of that, I think you feel much more depressed, much more isolated. And when you can belong in a way that your voice is heard, when you can actually roll up your sleeves, when you can think different thoughts around how a community can be stronger, not only do you make the community better, but you also make yourself happier and healthier. So when we do things like mobilization for volunteerism or giving or advocacy, those are all ways to strengthen our individual community resilience, our personal resilience, but also to get access to help, again, solve some of those larger issues that sometimes feel like they're not solvable or aren't able to be addressed. But when we do something, when we make incremental changes, when we make transformative changes, when more people are involved, we can really move the needle and help our whole community be healthier.
Okay, when you say social capital, what does
Yeah.
that mean?
So to me, social capital is about that relationship that Grant was talking about earlier. When you're in spaces where you get to really know somebody or get to know their institution and know what are the values, what are the competencies, where are the strengths, where are the opportunities, you can start knitting together a bigger picture of who can do what most effectively. And so I think that inside social capital is, when there is an issue presented to make change around, how do you know how to pick up the phone, how to ask the question, how to be brave enough to engage in the conversation that might be super uncomfortable, to be able to figure out what's the next step? Because I think sometimes we sort of feel like, ugh, they disagree. There's no solution here. There are too many barriers. And when we start asking questions about, you have a different lens on this than I do. How would you remove this barrier? What are the opportunities to make this thing better? That is social capital. Like, that is the ability to then be able to get to more trusted conversations where you can say the thing you're thinking out loud and start respecting one another to understand, where do we agree, what can we get done, and how do we actually move the ball forward.
Okay, so this is all really fascinating to me. I want to take it to the individual actor level. So, in my opinion, not everybody pictures themselves as being in leadership, but everybody leads somewhere. They
Yes.
lead a
Yes.
family member or a group of friends who just can't pick a restaurant, or they lead the initiative for their parents' anniversary party, or they lead in just who's going to clean the dishes in the sink at work, right? There are
Yes.
lots and lots of places where we step into a leadership moment, even if leader isn't part of the words on our business card. So when I start to think about the lessons that you both have for us about creating community, you're thinking really big. And I want to see which of those lessons translate to me when I'm thinking about just me and the other people. I happen to live in a row house on a city street in Pittsburgh. So if I just think about the other 6 homeowners whose houses are physically attached to mine, that's a little geographic. I'm learning geographic proximal community, so that if I find out that, like, there's a problem in our roof, I know those people, I know who I can go to. I know that the person who lives to the right of me, they're actually just renting, somebody else owns that house. So in the same way, we're facing a challenge. I got to know kind of who the players are and what they're good at, what they have an option to do, what they don't. I know that one person rents 3 of those homes and one person's been their renter for 6 years and the other 2 are new this year. So I can't get a hold of that person. I'm gonna go to the person I know has been there for 6 years, right? So that sounds like what you're saying about social capital. And if I'm thinking, hey, I live here, there's 6 of these homes, we're all attached. We will at some point, because it's happened before with squirrels, have a problem that we all have to deal with. What could I do to strengthen our community now, so that when that next thing happens, like, how could I take the lessons you both know in macro and make them micro? Or in my workplace, what could I do to take the people who happen to be at my site of my office and strengthen our community? Because my struggle as an employee is that I hear leaders talking a lot about creating culture. And I get that. I want them to create good culture. I want them to give us all the impression that we care about people's birthdays and that if you're sick, we all want to know how we can help. But how do we as individuals knit together a tighter, more resilient community?
I'll jump in. I mean, a couple things, and this is building on some stuff that Renee was saying. The term about social capital and trust, right? And those two things go hand in hand. And I think one thing that any individual could do is to build social capital and do two things. One, extend their network,
Mhm.
in terms of, introducing themselves or friends or partners to new people, but then also sharing their network of people with their colleagues or their neighbors. And your own case there is a good one in terms of a row house in Pittsburgh, right? Like, we used to. Some people play 6 Degrees of Kevin Bacon. We play 6 Degrees of Pittsburgh, and that
I love
it's the
it.
same game, but eventually you can get anybody that gets connected within that network effectively. And I think small little activities, whether it's sharing a coffee on a Saturday morning on the porch, or now is the season to pick up leaves together, or little activities that show the type of person that you are and the empathy and compassion that you have, goes a long way to whenever you get a hole in the roof because the squirrel chewed through the chewed through the insulation, or whatever the case may be, right? Where you have to do those small activities to build the trust that allows you and enables you to work on the larger, more dynamic and challenging activities. Um, and I think that's also, and Pittsburgh's a great example of that. It's enriching to basically have kind of those relationships where you're introduced to someone else's network that takes you out of your comfort zone, but teaches you something new that increases kind of your knowledge and capacity, so that when you do have to pick up the phone and find a roofer that you can all trust, you can probably get a couple different recommendations, and that goes for any type of situation. So I think building that social capital, doing small kind of activities that helps you to build trust over time, makes for a more fruitful relationship and allows you to solve challenges and address problems.
Mm, I
For
love
all the
that.
folks who are with us here today, if you're thinking about this from a leadership standpoint or in a work environment or whatever that lens that you're bringing, please drop any questions that you have or thoughts or ideas that you have about how to grow the resilience of a community. Renee, what other ideas do you have for me? So
Yeah.
Grant, and to sum that up, he basically said you can extend a hand. Hi,
Mhm.
this is who I am. It's nice to meet you. These are my people. You can welcome people in too. I'm having this get together for my family, but I'm going to invite a couple of my neighbors.
Yeah, I love those. I think those are great suggestions. I'm still really reflecting on your first part of your question around being a leader, and I think that not everybody thinks of themselves that they are a leader, and I think that is one opportunity. I always say to folks, lead where you stand, wherever you are, however insecure or awkward or uncomfortable you feel, know that you can make a difference. And so I think starting out with that mindset is actually a pretty great first step. And what Grant is talking about, when you extend a hand, invite people in, or share your networks, even something as simple as looking somebody in the eye and giving a little smile or saying hello in the morning. And I feel like that is something that has become more difficult
Mm.
post-pandemic. And I think it also feels a little scarier or even riskier, just as people get a sense of like, what does safety mean? And there's so much conversation about safety lately. And I feel like, that's a little bit in conflict with that sense of you can only grow through discomfort, right? And so I think a lot of us want to be safe, but if we can only grow through discomfort, how do we reconcile those things? And so those little tiny acts, when you're talking about the individual level, to say, how can I open my heart, open my mind? What's the worst thing someone can do? Not look you in the eyes back, not smile back, maybe think you're a little bit weird. From the perspective, I maybe shouldn't use that word these days, but a little awkward. But from the perspective of, I say, embrace that, right? Embrace those feelings of discomfort, embrace that, somewhat awkwardness, to be able to, just start feeling more connected to one another, because I think through that connection, you get to those larger opportunities, and you do start feeling like you are more connected, like you belong, like you can make a difference. And it's sort of an exponential thing, right? It's an exponential ability to be able to feel a part of the community, and really have an intentional sense of what community is when you open your heart and you open up your behaviors a little bit.
Mm.
And I think having more communities, not bigger communities. I'm not trying to, I get some pushback sometimes because people will say, well, sure, this is all easy for you because you're an extrovert. I have no idea how they knew, but, uh, but we can, I really appreciate what you're talking about in terms of the obstacle of thinking, boy, I'm not going to go invite somebody I've never talked to, knock on their door, invite them into my home. That feels too scary. But I could smile at them. I could toss their newspaper a little closer to their front door,
Mhm.
or, you know, shovel some of the snow that crosses over onto their sidewalk, just
Mhm.
as a gesture of goodwill. Or something that's very pressing for me right now today is move some of their trash cans off the sidewalk too, since trash got picked up, so that people with baby strollers and wheelchairs can get by, which is a problem in our neighborhood sometimes. So small things slowly over time, like drips of water, actually carve away rock, whereas blasting that water with a fire hose just gives you a clean rock. So it can make a big difference to show who you are slowly over time and allow that relationship to build.
Mhm.
I am wondering, when we think about workplace resilience, building communities within our workplace and then making those communities more resilient. And Grant, I'm going to put you a little bit on the spot. I did not warn you about this question, but when you think about sustainability and governance as you're guiding other companies,
Yeah.
which I know you do, besides team building activities at a professional development day, what are some things that leaders can do that
Mm.
don't just tell, but show that community matters to them in their workplace?
One of the things, we're actually working through this right now on the sustainability side, and sustainability for a lot of folks, and maybe just to paint a quick picture, like I work in the infrastructure development and construction space, so we build large, heavy civil infrastructure.
Give us an example. What's civil infrastructure?
Civil infrastructure for you, we're going to be working on the Commercial Street Bridge.
Bridge. Okay,
Is
a
the
bridge is a good example. Great, thanks.
Good example. So don't complain when it closes in 2026, but we'll get you the detour.
Don't complain. Interesting. Go ahead.
But that, so this is, you can picture heavy equipment and the complexities that go into a big infrastructure project. And one of the big things we were finding is trying to find ways to create shared language. In the sustainability space or in any industry, I think oftentimes you get caught into lingo and jargon, which then creates barriers and boundaries for folks because they're unfamiliar for it, or with it. And so one of the things that's been a big piece of my work is learning, our my counterparts and my colleagues, their lingo and jargon, and how do you translate that terminology into your terminology and vice versa. Because in many cases we're talking about like the same things, just using different terms.
This
um,
works with everyone except teenagers.
this works with everyone except for teenagers. That's a whole
That just
different.
makes them cringe. Don't try to do this. Don't
Yeah,
bother.
don't try to use their words. Don't try. I don't even
Right,
go there.
right. But with
But
everybody else, that makes sense. Learning what their abbreviations stand for,
yes.
learning, and as somebody who wants to build community, maybe trying to use fewer abbreviations.
Yes.
Fewer abbreviations, but and a lot of big piece of this is to ask questions and to listen and learn from them. And when you do that, then you're able to start to translate and take like the next level in the step. And also, like, one of the things I'm teaching myself is to be patient, and that it takes time, because that type of change and any type of change management, it doesn't happen overnight. Going back to Renee and the use of the word trust, right? Like, we only move at the speed of trust, I think, is the phrase. And so when you can start to engage in that dialogue, it gives you the building blocks to start to step upon. I think that's critical anywhere you go.
Absolutely.
I agree.
And it
I
works
actually
with
want to,
teenagers too. It does.
yeah, it is. It's
What's that,
true.
Renee?
I said it works with teenagers too.
Works for teenagers
That-
too.
The curiosity
That's
them-
fire.
and
That's fire.
listening.
Oh, I did it. I said it.
You did it.
That's right.
Activity. Sorry, just kidding.
Yeah.
So Darisha made a great point, which is you still do, it's really useful to find out what those words mean from
Absolutely.
teenagers, but using them just causes them to like crumple
Yeah.
into this horrified mass.
Mhm.
Chris made a great point in the chat, said other ideas for building community, bring homemade snacks. With a particular example, and now I'm hungry, sourdough chocolate chip cherry scones.
Whoa.
Anyway, Chris quotes Kevin Kelly from Excellent Advice for Living and says, the more you're interested in others, the more interesting they'll find you. To be interesting, be interested. And that's exactly what you're saying, Grant. You're saying, ask questions, listen to the answer and that you get. And I think that that is one of the best things that leaders can do, is to build community by just asking.
Mhm.
And not necessarily putting someone on the spot. Renee, I hear your people have a holiday today. Would you like to tell everyone about it? Very few people unasked are ready to give a book report on anything, no matter how well they know it. But pulling that person aside and being like, hey, I saw in your PTO that you're taking a religious holiday next week, and I'm just interested. Will you teach me more about your holiday?
I think one of the great aspects, just to hit on that, Dr. G, you were saying, one of the great aspects of leadership is leaders that are curious.
Mhm.
And just that curiosity to kind of learn, and because then you're constantly feeding information in yourself that then you can apply when the right time arises. But that opportunity to be curious is really amazing, I think, in leadership development.
Renee, how have you built the habit of being curious? Because you said that when you try and help people and you're always trying to solve problems, that if they were easy to solve, they'd be solved already. And that you make a habit of saying through your lens, how would you approach this? How did you get yourself in the habit of not just having answers, but having questions?
That's a great question. I do think earlier on in my career, I thought it was my job to have the answers, right? And as I progressed and as I became more of a leader, I realized, oh, I sort of went from the individual contributor from like, it's my job to do it and to know, to the next level of it's my job to get a team to know and do it. And
Mm.
then, really in these types of, large leadership positions, it's more about how do we invent the future together? And so because there's no rule book and there's no, strict A plus B equals C, the curiosity is just it's mandatory in terms of actually being effective in leadership. I'm going to tie this question back together with the other one about building culture in companies. And one of the things that we get to do at United Way is work with a whole myriad of businesses and industries. And in fact, United Way was started, really in our community by the private sector who wanted more philanthropy and giving to go more toward effective, accountable, measurable outcomes. And so part of the way to do that has really evolved into a way of learning how to do culture building in businesses. And I agree with you that you can't just sort of say, here's the culture and mandate that, right? The individual people and the teams, that creates the culture. And I love that other comment, the quote that's out in the world that says, whether you think you have a culture or you don't, you do. And, how you attend to that matters. And I think that whether it's supporting, like Grant is doing through ERG work, and individual sort of microcultures in a company, or just aligning around what do we stand for and how do we align, what we do with what we stand for, or how do we know what to do or not to do because of those standards is a really important part of that. So I think that, the big answer to your question is just experience over time. And just, what I have found that the less you think and the more that you can get other people engaged in helping you understand, the bigger things you can do, the more effective you can be, and the greater change you actually make. Because the things that get in the way of at least community change, in my mind, oftentimes are who gets credit and where the funding goes. And so those are very, very, very tangible, specific things. But before you get to who gets credit and where the money goes, have we co-created the problem we're trying to solve? Have we co-created the ability to how to respond together, right? You need to work through the tension points to be able to get to a clearer line of sight again on where we can agree and what we can get done. And that only comes through that humility that you don't have all the answers and the willingness to understand that lots of people have more expertise. And certainly when we're dealing with social services and health and human services, people know what the solutions are, right? And so you need to get out of the way and really empower others to be able to bring that forward. And so that's where that listening skill comes from. That's where that ability to truly learn and connect the dots to know what to do next comes in.
I really appreciate that. I want to highlight just a couple of things that I've learned in this conversation and mention that the reason that I wanted to talk about community, the reason I want people to identify more communities that they could choose to be a part of, that they could work on making stronger, is because resilience, which I think is the answer to everything, right? The ability to navigate change towards a positive goal, it is tied so completely to what we do when we run out of answers. If I had all the answers, if that was something, I mean, certainly my 19-year-old self thought that was possible. If that was something that was actually possible, I wouldn't need community. But because as we get more wise and more experienced, we learn that we don't even know what we don't know. There's so many things in the world. It is our community, whether that's just our nuclear family, right? Whether that's our trusted closest friend, whether that's our boss, whoever it is, those are the people that we're going to go to when we're struggling, and or when we have come upon a change and we're not sure the best way to get to our goal or even what our goal should be. So I want people to have community because community makes individuals stronger. I want those communities to be more resilient because that's how we guarantee that everybody has a safety net. Everybody has a fallback. I know that your work, Renee, is based on making more safety nets, tighter safety nets, better safety nets for people. Not only, but that's one of the things that a lot of the agencies that you work with do. You guys gave me a formula here. Collaboration and community equals more trust and safety, right? And taking some of the things that you said and putting it together, that's one of the things that I really heard from this. And we've got a whole list of hows that we can do that at the individual level, in our workspaces, when we're thinking about our entire geographic, larger, not just neighborhood maybe, or my row house, but our whole city or a whole county, which is, I think, as big as you can get and still have that geographic cohesion. You can certainly have cohesion across religious groups or people who are very, very values tied in some way, or at a corporation, at a company that's very mission oriented. But I don't know how you get an entire county of people to agree on one mission, besides making their geographic region a place that is safe and good for them to be. So thinking about what it is that draws us together is the strategy that seemed to underlie all the other strategies that you talked about. What is it that we all have, not just in common, right? We all drive the same road to get to work because that's the only way to get here, but why do we do it? And identifying what you have in common with other people's purpose, what your purpose, where it overlaps with other people's purpose, is a really great way to identify the community and strengthen it, be able to connect to other people. I really appreciate you taking the time. I want to mention that we have another resource someone mentioned in the chat. Neela said that her favorite leadership book, Leading with Presence by Maggie Farrar, all about putting mindfulness at the center of all leadership moves, and has a huge impact on building community. And I appreciate that. And before we go, I want to ask you, and Grant, I'm going to start with you. What community effort have you been a part of that really brought you joy?
That really brought me joy. At what scale of community are you talking? Can you
Don't care.
Don't care? Don't care?
Don't care. To my point, right? Lots of community levels.
Lots of community. I'll tell a story real quick. The one that brought me joy was I was the head of my community council for a while in my neighborhood, and one of the things that we would do as a community council is a number of events. And one of the things that brings me joy is to see that those events continue to endure to this day. And so, when you see those little seeds that you plant, that is, all the work that goes into a community event. But when you see those things start to continue on after you leave your post and position, or that you see the fruits of those labors, those are the things that bring me joy.
That's awesome. I really relate to that. How about you, Renee?
Yeah, so, so many things, right? Finding new ways to end family homelessness, finding new ways to help people volunteer through a pandemic. I mean, really hard, big things. And what's in my heart right now is, all the people who come together to give so generously. Some people give $1 a pay period, some people give $100,000, and everybody contributing a little bit to multiply that to help invest in our community is so powerful. And what gives me so much joy is not only knowing those folks are doing that voluntarily over and above what's necessary, but also the chance to say thank you and have that gratitude. It's just so powerful. I'm really lucky that I experience some of the lowest lows that people go through in their lives, but also some of the highest highs because people come together to help. And so that's pretty joyful. And Dr. G, can I close on my family motto story? I know
Yes,
you want to be done right on time. But when my little guy was in daycare, I walked out of his room one day to go to work and said onward, and his teacher said upward, and my little guy squawks out awkward. And we really felt that was a great family motto. So keep going, keep getting better, and you have to grow through discomfort. If it's not uncomfortable, you're not growing. And so to me, that really sums up this sense of resilience. And I wanted to take it from that big community level down to that individual. So I hope we can all feel that way, and that resonates with folks.
Onward, upward, awkward. Fantastic. Thank you both for being here. Thanks for everyone who joined us. I really appreciate it. Next month, we're actually going to continue this theme a little bit. We're going to talk about volunteering and how volunteering builds and can tear down personal resilience and team resilience and organizational resilience, how and why we might use volunteering to strengthen ourselves.
Great.
Thanks, everyone.